Hello and welcome to week 10 in Introduction to Sociology. And we're going to be taking on two chapters again this week. And these chapters tend to be grouped together. In fact, I used to use a sociology textbook that was a condensed version of sociology and the topics, and they actually put religion and education in the same chapter because you're basically looking at institutions that exist that teach a prescriptive set of values, norms, and expectations for behavior in preparation for a life in society. So from a sociological point of view, religions and education work in very similar ways. So we're going to be taking a look at that as we make our way through the content in these chapters. You'll see the similarities that exist and why someone might be motivated to put these two areas into the same chapter. So we're going to start with chapter 15. We have separated these out in the current rendition of this class, and this we're going to talk about religion. So first off, to identify this relationship that exists between these two, we have religion and education here kind of exemplified by these two circles. What we can say about both of them is that they are both socializing systems for the indoctrination of values, norms, and expectations. Now, indoctrination feels like a very negative term, but essentially if you are going to be successful in these organizations, and these are free-willed organizations we would imagine that we have chosen to join, and the idea is that you are accepting that new way of thinking that is being promoted, the new norms, values, and expectations. Again, the key part of that, however, is choice. Now, certainly as young children, we may be put into religious organizations and we're put into schools, and we don't really have a whole lot of choice about that. But nonetheless, it is still, as adults, we then have the opportunity, as I talk about in my developmental psych class, to recarve those pieces for ourselves and choose at that point if we want to engage in religion and which one, and if we want to go to school and which one. So choice remains a very, very important part of our adult experience with both religion and education. So for now, we're going to take a look at religion. And religion is primarily defined as a worldview that separates the world into things that are sacred and things that are secular. And so we need to get that right off the ground here. Secular essentially is the material world. It's changeable. It is less than the spiritual. It's not as valuable as the spiritual stuff that we're going to see in the sacred end. And it is of manner, of humanity. It's of our creation. It is the material aspects of the world. Okay? So in religion, many, not all, but many religions, there's this separation. There's this world around us, and then there's something else. There's a continuing of reality, perspective of reality that are considered to be sacred. Now, from the sacred point of view, we have spiritual things. These are eternal, and I'm going to contrast that with changeable in just a moment, transcending normal human experience and of God or of the spiritual world. Now, these two words, sacred and secular, we often don't use in everyday language the word secular, but it refers to those things of the world. We do, however, use the word sacred. Now, sacred is, like all words, has many meanings. So some things like time with my children is sacred. Now, what we're using the term for at that point is to designate our feelings about a particular thing that we'd be very unwilling to let go of. Okay, in that way. It doesn't meet all the criteria of what we're talking about when we talk about things that are sacred under religious teaching. So the teachings, let's say, the one I'm most familiar with, and it's the vantage point I need to come from, is Christianity. Then the Bible in certain books within the Bible are considered, the words with them are considered sacred, because the feeling within the Christian world is that those were actually not written by human beings, but those were actors, and they were writing the Word of God. So you can imagine that that's different than the kind of, that's my sacred chair. Nobody sits in my chair. Nobody sits in Dad's chair, that kind of thing, because it's sacred. That's different than this notion of something that has very, very powerful transcending components to it from those who had those belief systems. Now, so the discussion about in the real world, when we use these terms, I want to take a little bit of time to look at the notion of changeability, whether something can be changed or not. And so here we have, I'm going to highlight these two, right? Oh, that was a quote, things that surpass the limits of knowledge by Emil Durkheim. But let's look at these two right here, kind of highlighted on the secular end of things. Things are changeable, and on the sacred side of things, things are eternal. And so let's say we might approach some things as unchangeable because we feel that they're sacred when they might be secular. So let's just say certain components of the Constitution. The argument could be said that those things are sacred, meaning so well written, they're timeless, you really shouldn't mess with them. And that's probably true in many ways. We should be very, very wary of messing with things that have been working for a long time. But at the same time, those things are not sacred. They were not written by us, God, and therefore they are subject to some modifications and changes. That doesn't mean that we should be just doing it willy-nilly, but certainly that notion that some things should never be changed when it comes to the many things that we've created as human beings, change is actually going to enhance our survival. And kind of, again, separating that out from the sacred things, where the belief systems, where the Bible or the Quran or the, whatever sacred books or sacred places, that those are things that are important to people and should not be damaged or changed in any way. So we continue our discussion here by looking at the different perspectives of religion, and just going through these four main perspectives. The functional perspective, very clearly indicating that religion has a set of norms, expectations, values that they teach to their adherents, people in that faith, and in many ways that is professed as the God-given need for those individuals to act within those boundaries. And for some people, there's a perspective of, let's say within the Christian tradition, which kind of like in the Jewish tradition and also in the Muslim tradition, of that human beings are material and therefore imperfect. The concept of original sin and whatnot, and that we're always going to bumble things. We're just not that good at being, thinking human beings, and we're going to, however you want to phrase that, as a sin or as just a human nature, and those kind of things, that we will fail, and that we need guidance from the outside, wisdom that maybe transcends human knowledge and is universal, and that can help us guide our lives. So the function being an ability to essentially reel people in and keep them from acting in ways that are outside of the will of universal norms, values, and expectations. As you can probably imagine, that creates a little bit of conflict. When you have more than one perspective on how people are supposed to act in order to be in line with the will of God, and they're contrary to each other, of course, we have conflict. And even just conflict within my own personal egocentric needs to do certain things, but the church says no. What? Or society says no, but through the church, and you're not supposed to do that. It's going to be unpleasant for God, and just like wait a minute, what about me? You know, those kinds of inner conflicts, but certainly external conflicts. Each church, many times, each religion professing that they have a unique interpretation of truth and they don't necessarily align. It's interesting just to think about it that way in terms of, you know, what are the shared components of different religions? And there are many, much as we would think about shared or universal aspects of human development. We can see universal aspects of all religions, certain stories, certain ethics, certain morals that exist within almost every religion provides an interesting template upon which the framework of all these were built. But yet, conflict remains. I will refrain from saying that necessarily, and I want to say this carefully because it's not 100%, we often see religion as a core causal factor in worldwide conflict, wars, and whatnot. And while religion has certainly played a very important and very divisive and very causal role in many of those, it's more often that individuals pursuing their own agenda will use religion in order to take their cause and make it sacred. And so we go back to this cause of like, I want that land. And you think, okay, well, how do I convince people to take that land unless I can convince them that God says it already belongs to them? You just need to move in and get rid of the people that are there. This is clearly documented within the Old Testament Christian Bible of the Hebrew population moving into areas and just wiping out the existing inhabitants of that based on this idea that this was promised land. It was already set aside for them. So we can see how religion is used by powerful individuals and has been used. Is it the actual religion that's doing that, or is it the people who are manipulating individuals with those belief systems? I have a tendency to lean toward the manipulation part. Powerful leaders taking their very worldly agenda of power, wealth, land, occupation, and turning them into sacred duties so that they can mobilize large numbers of people. So certainly we keep an eye out for that kind of perspective on religion. Now the next one here, we have the symbolic perspective, and this is probably for any individuals who are adherents to any faith or religion, is the personal meaning this has for you. And we take this into consideration from sociology, the same way we take that into consideration in human development. Although human development the focus does not encompass the before and after life periods, if there's anything like that. However, beliefs in before and after life impact human development. So we can look at what does religion mean to somebody, what does faith mean to them in terms of their human struggle, and we can understand groups of people, we can understand individuals within those groups and how those dynamics happen because of those individual perspectives. So each of you may have a perspective on that stuff, whether it could be you're a regular churchgoer, or you can be a person who sees the transcending existence simply looking at the stars, or even simply looking at a plant in the forest. And so the diversity of ways in which we can experience that transcending nature is the degree to which you embody within yourself a symbolic representation or symbolic perspective of that from the sociological point of view, that this has meaning for you, and those would dictate your actions. So, and when you're with individuals of like mind, those individuals can act as a group. It's a cohesive bonding component of those. It's a shared identity. It really is. We go back to that definition of groups as people who interact a lot and have a shared identity and purpose. Many times these shared identity and purposes are transcendent. meaning we have a shared vision of a spiritual world or a world with an all-powerful being, or just simply being in a vast, complicated universe that is too immense for even humans to understand, and sharing that belief system with each other. And what does that mean to you? And what does that mean to changes in society and the impact of these ideas on our society? And then finally, we look at postmodern perspective. And here's where we can look at religion from the point of view of consumerism and technology. And wow, I mean, it's sort of a from the tents to television programming, and there's no doubt that churches have adapted to new technology. It's just in the church that I go to Faith Church in Waterville, and throughout the pandemic here, there's been the switch to virtual services, and what happened with the band that was playing, how we had to practice, and then not only socially distanced, but using technology to actually enable that to happen. A video company is now at every service, and they stream the service to an online audience. And just seeing how technology has played a role in the continuing mission of churches, how technology plays a role in how people communicate, how they can be with each other, be present. And of course, seeing how maybe even in the negative ways that technology has created ways in which extremists with a religious slant to them can communicate with each other. I guess that's sort of agnostic to religion. I mean, that happens with any extremist or anything like that, but you can see it in that respect too. But also consumerism, people's money and people donating, and these mega churches that have thousands upon thousands of members, and the amount of money flowing through there and purchasing paraphernalia, and there's an economy of this as well. There's these organizations don't necessarily earn money like we would normally imagine, providing a service and charging for it. That's kind of not the church way. So individuals in those organizations are encouraged to donate or tithe, T-I-T-H-E. That's a term used within the Christian circles of giving a certain percentage of your income to support the church that you believe in. Now keep in mind, go right back to that first slide. This is all by choice. Sorry about my email coming in there. But sorry about it's all by choice. So individuals could go into an organization, and that organization can say, welcome, this is our norm, value, expectation. Our expectation is that you're going to participate in the maintenance of this organization, and you'll do that willfully and gleefully. And if it's okay with those individuals, rock on. And so that brings us to all of our perspectives. We move into the assessments for this particular chapter. And that includes a discussion on religion, a fair, open discussion. Where are you at with this particular topic, and sharing your ideas about that, being very kind to each other, as we always should be. And of course, a quiz that asks you to identify things that are sacred and secular in your life. And I'm going to ask that you really focus on kind of like the real definition of secular that I was talking about, sociological definition of secular and sacred. More on sacred. But are there objects in your house that you'd run into the burning building to get? Maybe there's, grandma's locket that has extreme importance to you, and it would be a terrible loss for you. Might be something that's very sacred to you. But either way, I'm just looking for you to be able to make a clear delineation between sacred and secular in this particular assessment. So we switch gears now, and we're looking at education. Let me get my slideshow ready here. Chapter, let's see. That was chapter 15. Now we're chapter 16, getting my numbers right here. And here we are in chapter 16, talking about education. I'm going to start off the same way. here we have religion and education, and both socializing systems for the indoctrination of values, norms, and expectations, and choice is involved. There's not a lot of choice. I mean, school choice has been kind of on the front burner, kind of thing about having some choices in that. But certainly, as adults, we're choosing that. In childhood is always sort of a little kind of iffy place when we talk about choice, because even to this day, children themselves do not have the Bill of Rights does not apply to them. The rights of being able to choose their own future and whatnot, that falls to parents. So we're really looking at parent choice in terms of where they want to send their schools. And there are choices. There's different schools. There's public schools. There's private schools. There's schools that are based in churches and religions. And there's homeschooling. There's all these kinds of choices that people have in terms of raising their kids. And certainly when we look at it from an adult perspective, if you're going to go to college, you're all coming to KV, but you had other choices. Those choices might not have been as enticing. Clearly they weren't, because you're here, but you certainly had choices. So this framework here of how we approached religion applies to education, just simply different mechanisms for the indoctrination of values, norms, and expectations. So knowledge, according to Thomas Jefferson, knowledge is power. Power, we know, has been one of the central ideas in sociology that we have been connecting to inequality. So we view education as a system that actually creates inequality. Now, we hope that that system of creating inequality is by merit. If somebody goes to school and they are successful in acquiring knowledge, acquiring skill, and those knowledge and skills are marketable in the economy, and they can sell their labor at a higher price, then that's why it's there. It creates the rungs on the ladder, or some of the rungs on the ladder, the steps that people can take to move up in the socioeconomic hierarchy. And so education, that's a key role, is to, first off, select individuals through the education process that starts right at admissions. We select individuals, we put them through the ringer of our education curriculum, and if they are successful in completing them, we place them upon the hierarchy. So education has what we might say is a manifest function. Its primary function is to select individuals and place them upon the social hierarchy based on their accomplishments, hopefully totally through merit. So, taking a look at the history of how did we get where we are right now in terms of higher education and just how people learned to do what they were going to do. Agriculture had its apprenticeships. In the early world, we learned from our parents and what they did. It's very rare that people went off and did something else. People were raised to take over the farm, primarily agriculture, take over hunting, and wasn't a lot of whole diversity of jobs that were there. I mean, even within tribal type social organizations, we saw just a few roles. Aside when there was conflict, there were universal roles having to do with childbirth, how people looked. There was always hairdressers, and there was always people makeup, and then different ways in which we modified our bodies. There's a cultural universal there, and then people who dealt with the spiritual world or the sacred, and then protectors and providers, and then children, and then you had all of those. That was kind of it. Now, as societies become increasingly complex, we see an increasingly complex division of labor and also different kinds of labor. Technology, as I'm going to get to in just a moment, technology created more time for us to do other things, and the advent of modern society with all of its good, the cool things that happen because of technology, like art and music and whatnot, all come from the excess of time and allowing individuals to focus their energies on those things, for those to be their jobs. Now, at the beginning, we had this notion, such as in agriculture and apprenticeships, you would learn from the masters and you would become that. That was the way in which knowledge was transferred from person to person. This formulated later into guilds and organizations, and these guilds and organizations protected the information. And if you look at something like the modern day Masons, the Masons have very old origins, going to a point at which Masonry, the building of churches and cathedrals and the technology of understanding that was worth a lot of money. So they created organizations to protect that information, to keep it private. So not everybody knows it. That means you have a product that they need to come to you for, and you can charge for it. If everybody knew how to do it, then they would be out of business. So guilds would get together and they would hold on to that information as sacred, and they would not pass it on unless somebody was initiated into that group. And you can think about higher education right now as there are, if you're going to become an electrician, there are pathways to do that, all of which mean you have to apply, you're determined to be eligible, you go through a process, you go through an initiation process, an education process, and then they bequeath upon you some sort of certificate that that information, and that's the only way you can become an electrician. You can't just study in the books and then apply for an electrician's job. We've created this mechanism, and they're similar to the guilds, that we're going to hold this information, and it's not that it's not publicly it's available, but you're going to have to learn it from us, and you're going to have to jump through our hoops in order for us to bequeath upon you the ability for you to market those skills, both protecting the consumer from people who don't know what they're doing, but protecting the body of knowledge to make sure it remains consistent. And so we have our guilds that still exist today. We have, in terms of general education, we actually can thank many religious, primarily the Protestant churches. So you had the Catholic Church way back when, and that's a whole interesting study in itself. The Catholic Church and its restriction on the peasantry and their ability to encounter the Word of God directly. So the Bible at that point was written in Latin, which is considered a sacred language because it's unchanging. Get to that. And so that same with the Hebrew alphabet is considered sacred because there's no new words. There's no new words in Latin. It's what we call a dead language, but by that, it has become a sacred language. So the Catholic Church perceived the Bible as a sacred book, written in an unchanging sacred language. So only people who went to school to learn how to read Latin could understand reading the Bible, let alone going to a mass, a church service, and the entire thing was done in Latin, and most people didn't understand what was being said. Now, contrast that with the Protestant Reformation, the protesting revolution that occurred, where there's a separation in the church, and it was spearheaded by Gutenberg's printing of a Bible in the vulgar language, referred to in that history as the Vulgate, a version of the Bible printed in German at that time, printed in languages that people knew and could learn how to read. And it also introduced changeable languages. So there's obviously, if you're going to write the Bible in English, look how many different versions of the Bible there are, because the English language is a moving, dynamic language. Now, what happened under the Protestant church is there was a strong ethic that individuals should encounter the Word of God directly by reading it themselves. Develop a personal relationship with God, not one that is facilitated necessarily by a patriarchal hierarchy, although patriarchal hierarchies did continue. They could read the Bible themselves. So, reading, learning how to read, became a sacred duty. And we see the introduction of a curriculum, the first of the R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? We see in early public education, reading come along, and the reading was so you can read the Bible and encounter God and be saved and all of those things that go along with that. So many school children in their original, way back then would encounter reading by learning how to read the Bible. That was the book. There weren't many other books. Of course, that's obviously very much changed today. But the Protestant Reformation introduced the notion of creating educational institutions so that everybody could learn how to read. Then the government gets involved. Now, this comes around probably, it's sort of when I was going through the story of the shoemakers, that as technology, particularly with the Industrial Revolution, became more and more complex, there was a rising need for public education, and the other R's were added. So reading, writing, and arithmetic, being able to understand instruction manuals, being able to move from job to job, mass communication, advertising, all of these things. We wanted a literate society. So various laws started to be passed about mandatory education, and child labor laws came along, and so you get the mandatory length of that education. That you might, if you're going to take all of these kids out of the workplace, we're going to have them do something called school to keep them off the streets. And so the curriculum again expanded, and then over time, the curriculum time has simply grown. If you think about that as over time, you could probably get by with just third grade, and then you had to get up to sixth grade to get by. Then you have to at least get some high school in. Then you have to get high school, and we're moving into college and graduate school and gone. So the expectations go up sort of in that linear way as the expectations for the workplace continue to change. And as we're looking at a workplace that is continually changing, even within our own work span, the time in which we're going to be working, how we do our work is going to transform while we're there, and we're going to have to adapt. So education has had to adapt to not only teach you the skills that you need, but to teach you basic skills associated with adapting. So here's the way I learned how to do the electrician's job that I did, and then new standards come out, new tools, new ways to do things, but I can adapt because I've had other types of education that were not necessarily specific to existing technology. So government gets involved in terms of developing curriculums and whatnot, and then finally technology kicking in terms of sharing information, the publishing of works, videos, distance education, all of that, bringing, kind of democratizing education and allowing everyone the first few rungs of this ladder that did not exist before. You were born into money, rare that you would develop it, again, rare. So money was rare, most of the population being impoverished. And now there's these first steps. You can read, you can write. What are you going to do with that? You can do math. What are you going to do with that? And by requiring education for everybody, you're actually covering those first few rungs so people can have social mobility. They can move from one hierarchy to the other. They can move up the ladder, as they say, because we have now mandated that everybody has those first few rungs on the ladder. So let's take a look at the purpose of education, 3 general purposes, and then we're going to kind of tie this into your experience here at KV. And the first one is basically what I just said, universal education for social benefit. we benefit not only by having an educated population, we not only benefit by having people to go into various roles within industry, but an educated population votes better. They vote more conscientiously, they understand the issues better. So the critical thinking that's important in understanding the debates, the current social debates that are going on, education is critical. Education teaches you to be critical, teaches you to question assumptions, even to the point of questioning your own assumptions. So we see a relationship between education and the type of thinking that goes into decision making, including decision making related to government. And so this is part of the American experiment, has been to create a highly educated population that can then will not be subject to diversion, extremism, and we have not completed that goal yet. We are still a divided nation despite all of that education. And so a piece of that is, of course, dynamic leadership and what we've seen in that way in terms of influencing people's opinion, advertising and the media, but ultimately it might be a failure in education to hold children and everybody going through the education system to the notion of critical thinking and higher order thinking about issues like this. So it's a good thing to have an educated population. They're less likely to be manipulated. The next one is public schools and rational socialism. Socialism obviously gets a bad rap, particularly in America, but socialism is essentially, how do we give something to everybody? Because it's important for everybody to have it, and it's rational for that. We don't want to pick and choose who gets an education. We want everyone. Now that creates some problems as it solves some problems, but certainly by having everybody being able to access a basic education, we increase the knowledge base and critical thinking skills of the entire population, and that's good for all of us. Now, how schools go about how they go about doing that within a public format is where, people have differing opinions. But are there successful schools and unsuccessful schools? Why are they successful? Why are they unsuccessful? How do we distribute funds? There's still inequity in terms of schools that are in fairly wealthy and affluent neighborhoods. Their students tend to perform better than other schools that are in areas that are not as affluent. So money still plays a role in the success of those schools. But individuals who are in those very successful schools have failed, and individuals who have been in very poor schools have succeeded by their own will. But in general, there is a difference. It's not just by effort. We see inequity in terms of the distribution of resources and services to different schools to ensure that this rising tide of education floats all boats. Okay? Some of those boats have holes in them and they're remaining on the bottom. We've got to fix those holes so that the tide rising in education and public education becomes equitable. Now, we call it socialism because it's something everybody should have, and it should be paid for. It's not free. Nothing's free. It's not free. It's paid for collectively. So when we have something that we want everybody to have, when there's something we want everybody to have, and we pay for it collectively, that's socialism. That's the idea. So there are socialist policies. Even though we might not be we're a mixed economy in terms of socialism and capitalism plays a role. Even though we have socialized education in the public school system, we still have private schools that people can pay tuition. We even have here in Maine, I can think of MCI up here in Pittsfield, is a private school, but it is the public school for Pittsfield at the same time. So public money that is usually collected and goes to the school actually goes to a private school, and they recruit from all over the world as well. So a unique experience for those students that are living in Pittsfield. Now, finally, we see the third purpose here is vocational training for the future. Preparation for that. Education is supposed to be the place, the bleeding edge of technology, where people are not only learning what they have to know now to enter into the field, but what they will need to know and be able to do as that field changes. Now, this is currently, because of economics and time factors and the need for employees, currently under a little bit of attack. With how much focus in education do we do on strict vocational training, getting that person ready for the job that's waiting for them as soon as they walk out the door, and how much time do we spend in that education preparing them for the inevitable changes that are going to occur once they walk out that door and they're in their job for a while. And that balance between specific skill and knowledge-based education and general education, critical thinking and whatnot. Not that there isn't critical thinking over there, they're there, but you know, the courses that you have as your Gen Ed classes, they're the kind of weightlifting for critical thinking and adaptability later on. We want that embedded across the curriculum. And so schools are continually trying to find that balance between there so that their students are not only successful after day one, they're successful for the rest of their careers. Now here at KVCC, I'm going to use KVCC as the example of public education. Now this is socialism, true and blue, and it was rational socialism. So don't get worked up about the word. It's very rational. Here's KVCC, part of a Maine community college system, part of a state of Maine education system that includes all of the public schools and, of course, the University of Maine system as well. So let's take a look a little bit specifically at KVCC. KVCC started as one room and a closet in a local high school in an attempt to create a vocational school for students leaving high school that would prepare them for a number of jobs in business and technology. So 1965, I believe they started, very, very small, just that one room over in a high school in Waterville. And then they petitioned the state for money to create the community college system. Of course, this didn't happen just at KV, it was happening all over. They created the Maine Community, or what at that time was the Maine Vocational Technical Institutes. So KVCC was KVVTI, Kennebec Valley Vocational Technical Institute, that first name, and then it became Kennebec Valley Technical College in 1999 when I started teaching. It was KVTC. And then it was later, under the King administration, when Angus King was the governor of Maine, the community college, well, what was then the technical college system, competed to be the community college system of Maine. They competed actually against the University of Maine at Augusta. University of Maine at Augusta at that time had been doing the ITV, or interactive television education system, and they had sites all over the state, 120 sites. So they were embedded in the community, and they made a very good argument to be transformed into the Community College of Maine. And the University of Maine, I think it would have seceded or something from the university system. I was working at UMA at that time in the ITV place, and we were all for it. We thought this is great. This would be a great way for the school to have its own identity and whatnot, separate from the University of Maine. But the wind was not in our sails, and the technical college system became the community college system that it is today. It added functions within the community college to allow for transfer into the University of Maine. And what you see in terms of that historical change is essentially technology advancing in a number of fields that essentially said, you're halfway there when you get your degree or your certificate at KV. You're halfway there, but your field is going to require more than that. And so it's opening that door for transfer into the University of Maine system. And and those opportunities. So funding poured in. There's in terms of the funding of courses at KVCC, we have operation funds that come in through state appropriations that are voted upon every year by the legislature of Maine. We're part of the Maine budget in terms of providing education with the very rational expectation that we will charge less. For individuals who don't have a lot of money or don't want to get into a lot of debt, they can start and finish at Kennebec Valley Community College and not have to pay as much money. We're less expensive. And so now that doesn't mean it costs less to put on a class. It costs the same to put on a class for the most part at KV as it does to put it on at the University of Maine or to put it on at Colby College. But we have state appropriations and grants to offset some of our costs so we don't have to pass that on as bills to our students. And an internal effort to remain small, an internal effort to remain inexpensive through the use of open source materials for like the textbooks that I'm using for my courses are free. We develop a lot of our own materials and those kinds of things to keep expenses down so people can climb up some more rungs without being dragged down by the debt that would be associated with that. So that's all part of the rational socialism that brings into the reality an institution like KVCC. There's a culture at KVCC, norms, values, and expectations, coming to class, doing your work. There's definitively a little bit of blue collar. Not all white collar here. We're all hard workers. We've all had various kinds of jobs. Many faculty still working in their field. Many faculty working part-time jobs just to, keep themselves busy or keep themselves financially afloat. I think we're a little bit closer in understanding the situations of our students. And the culture is a very nurturing one. I've worked at several colleges, and this is the one I chose to stay at because of that general nurturing quality that we have. We care about our students' success, and we will try to make that happen. The success is always up to the student, but in the words of our previous IT director a couple years way back, when I first started, she said, the mission of IT is that technology won't be the reason somebody failed. And I think we all have that sort of sense of, I want you to be successful. My role is to make sure that I didn't get in the way of that. I challenged you. I told you what you needed to learn. If you didn't do it, that's fine, and you can come back, but it's not going to be because I failed to teach. And so that's the ethic of KVCC's culture embodied in there. We can apply all of the perspectives in terms of KVCC. It's our function within society to create the skills or to teach you the skills to go into different professions. In fact, each one of those degree programs is teaching a culture. There's a culture for electricians. There's a culinary culture. There's a psychology culture, a nursing culture, physical therapy. All of these have their own culture, and we're transmitting that. And I think because of our connection to the field, many of our PTs, OTs, RNs, and all are still working in the field. They know what's going on. Because of that, that gives them an extra advantage to be able to say, this is what you're going to need, and this is what you're going to be able, these are the changes coming on. You can understand those things at a very deep level. Very cool. And then finally, KVCC is embedded in a larger culture of economic change going on here in Maine. So, for example, a big movement going on right now at KVCC is in our business and industry aspect. And that's the part of the college that coordinates trainings, micro-credentials, badges, all of those things for industries that are out there. So if there's a company that's bringing in new technology, they might bring that training to KV. KV does all the logistics to put that training together, and we partner with that organization to provide that training to their old and new employees in order to adapt to those changes. Now aspect of our business was very small before. It grew at one time, it went small now, and now it's sort of on the rise as new technological businesses are coming in, or people are modernizing. They're taking, literally some of the businesses in Maine took this time of COVID thought, what do we do now? How do we adapt to this? How do we make sure that we don't lose our shirt the next time this happens? And those kinds of changes have really developed a strong necessity for training, continuing ongoing education within the workplace. Now that particular aspect of our school is growing and changing, is very nimble, can be very responsive, because we are very close to the communities that we are in. So the individuals that are running that particular part of the college are reaching out to local people on the phone, on a video conferencing. What do you need? We want to be the education part of your change. And so KV is very dynamic in that way, even within their programming for regular degree programs, being very responsive to the needs of the changing community. So that's sort of where KVCC is in terms of it being a public institution, all of us being state employees working with rational socialism to create an affordable option for people to advance themselves up the rungs of the ladder of opportunity. The question that I'm asking you to consider with this is it worth the money? Is it worth it? If you're getting your money's worth, as much as we're a public school, you're still a customer at the same time. I mean, are you happy with what's going on? It won't be perfect, and I'm going to look at me. I'm not way behind in grading, all of that stuff, and I don't say that flippantly. I know it's frustrating. It's frustrating for me as well. Not a perfect thing, but do you think you're getting your money's worth? Do you think that what you get out of KVCC is going to be what you want? It's going to send you down that path to whatever it is you're pursuing? Is this useful to you? All of those things. Those are things that are important. So I've created an opportunity for you to share that information with us, with me. I won't pass this on, don't worry about that. But this assessment is simply, what does getting a degree at KVCC mean to you, and is it worth the cost? And when I say cost, you can include time and money, time from your kids, extra stress, all of those things. How does it all fit into your motivation for being here at KVCC? Makes for some interesting conversation in the discussion boards, which is where I'll see you later. So you have a great week, and sorry for the late video. I'm going to work on that, but I will see you in the discussion boards as we have these great conversations.